Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Each a Parent. We're just going to wait a handful of minutes here. So all the people that are rushing home from work and pick up and drop off and all those things that we're all doing on a weeknight can gather what they need to gather and join. And I don't want anyone to miss a minute of this. So just hang on and we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Thanks for being here. So again, just welcome everyone. We'll start at approximately 6:04, 6:05. We have a lot of registrants. We don't want anyone to miss a minute. So we're just hanging in there until we get the majority of them to sign in, get something to write with, something to write on, warm cup of tea, so that you can settle in. We'll be right back. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Eat Chat Parent. And there has never been a more important time to show up. And we couldn't be more fortunate to have Dr. Tina Bryson leading us through the power of showing up this evening. Dr. Tina Payne Bryson is the author of The Bottom Line for Baby and co-author with Dan Siegel of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline, each of which has been translated into over 50 languages, as well as The Yes Brain and most recently, The Power of Showing Up. She is the founder and executive director of the Center for Connection, a multidisciplinary clinical practice in Southern California. Dr. Bryson keynotes conferences and conducts workshops for parents, educators, and clinicians all over the world. And she frequently consults with schools, businesses, and other organizations. An LCSW, Tina is a graduate of Baylor University with a PhD from USC. The most important part of her bio, she says, is that she's the mom of 3 boys. And you can learn more about Dr. Bryson at tinabryson.com. So I encourage you to grab a journal, grab a notebook, and take notes. There is so much extraordinary content. You'll want to come back to it and you'll want to share it with your family, of course, and your friends. I want to thank our sponsors, EVBH, Vail Health, Alpine Bank, Vail Resorts, Epic Promise, Slifer Smith and Franson Foundation, the towns of Avon, Eagle, Gypsum, and Vail, the Eagle River Foundation, Vail Valley Cares, SAMHSA, Wells Fargo, the Colorado Office of Behavioral Health, and the Eagle County Government. Please stay to the end because we will be giving away a copy of Tina's illuminating book, The Power of Showing Up, and a $100 gift card to the Assembly. If you are interested in accessing the closed captioning in Spanish, go to the account settings and click the meeting tab and enable closed captioning. Also, at the end of this presentation, Tina will be answering questions, so please put those in the Q&A section. And I couldn't be happier to turn this over to Dr. Tina Bryson. She has demystified attachment science for me, empowered my parenting through sitting with my girls through their big feelings. And the most important part of what she's done for me is that she's validated that my cursing helps decrease my subjective experience of physical and emotional pain. Dr. Tina Bryson, thank you so much for showing up for Eagle County.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. What a warm welcome. And yes, there is science that says that when we curse, it actually reduces our physical and emotional pain. So there's some good science like to use every day. So I'm so glad to be with you tonight. I'm so glad to have the honor to show up for you tonight as you are trying to show up for your kids during this really, really difficult time to be parents. It really, truly is. As you know, typically our kids are at school or they're in activities, but there's a lot of togetherness that's happening, which can be wonderful and very stressful and difficult as well. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about over 50 years of research that teaches us what is the most important thing in terms of how kids turn out. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, because right now, when we and our kids are walking through some really difficult stuff, what I love about what I'm going to talk about tonight, this research, is that this research is full of hope. I'm going to be talking about these messages that the research gives us, of messages of hope throughout the evening. And one of those messages of hope is that when we are in distress, when things are hard, when there are challenges, when we're at our worst, we actually have an inborn system that helps us survive those moments and be resilient. And that's really what the power of showing up is all about. So let's start with just a couple of basic things. The first is that one of the best predictors, as I mentioned, for how well kids turn out on really everything we measure them on, is that they've had what's called secure attachment with at least one person. And I want to be really clear that what I'm going to be talking about when I refer to secure attachment, or when I'm talking about attachment, is not at all the same thing as attachment parenting. You may have heard about attachment parenting, that is often attributed to Dr. William Sears, that has all of these sort of rules you follow in order for your baby to have attachment with you. And I'm not going to be talking about that at all, because even if you don't do any of those things that they suggest doing, you can still have children who are securely attached to you. And just because you do those behaviors doesn't ensure that your children are securely attached to you. So attachment is not really so much about a set of behaviors you do. It's really much more about the quality of how you show up. And that's what we're going to dig into tonight. The other thing you need to know, and I'm going to define attachment in just a minute, is that attachment is a mammal instinct and drive that is born within all of us. So these attachment drives and needs that we have are actually the entire lifespan. Preschooler or a school-aged or a tween or a teen or a young adult or even a grown child, there is always possibility to strengthen your child's attachment to you. And we're going to also talk about your own attachment needs and how we need people to show up for us as well. And so attachment is this inborn mammal instinct, as I said, that gets activated for the purpose of survival. So let's imagine a bear cub in the forest with a bear parent. And they're going along, and all of a sudden the bear cub either gets hurt or sees a predator or gets terrified by some sort of threat in the environment. So some sort of threat happens, something that just stresses the bear cub physically, emotionally, and yes, mammals have feelings, bears have emotions. So when this bear cub gets stressed out, afraid, is in distress, it has a biological instinct without really thinking about it, without saying, I wonder what I should do. There's this biological mammal instinct that drives that bear cub to their attachment figure, the mama bear, the papa bear, in order to survive. So if this vulnerable cub, when it's in distress, gets close to their attachment figure, they are much more likely to survive. the attachment figure, the bear, is supposed to protect and connect with this young bear cub in order to ensure its survival. And that's really what attachment is about. I'll give another quick animal example. So I have a wonderful dog that is, my kids say I love her more than them. Not true, but I do love her a lot. And I took her to get groomed for the first time ever. She's 3. We just let her be scraggly. We don't care. But she had some tangles in her. And the last time I tried to handle it, I hurt her. So I was like, we need to go get her worked on. So when I took her, and once she kind of realized what was going on, she began to tremble. And so I squatted down to get close to her. I pulled her close to me and I started talking to her and petting her, and she stopped shaking. So this is exactly what the attachment system is for, is that when we are in distress, our attachment figures, in this story, me, actually regulate or change and balance our physiological states. So how much my dog's heartbeat was, how fast her heart was racing and how much tension and energy she had in her body. When I got close to her, I was able to regulate her body, her physiological states, and to regulate emotional states. That's the purpose of attachment. Okay. So we all have that. When I get really angry, or I get really sad, or I get really frustrated, or I feel overwhelmed, or whatever it is, I instinctively want to reach out to my people. Although sometimes I really want to be by myself, and that's called self-regulation. But if I really have something wonderful to celebrate or something really difficult that's happening, I want to talk to my husband. I want to be close to him. I want to be close to my best friend and talk to her, my mom. So we all have attachment figures, even when we're 49, as I am. Okay, so this is this instinct that we all have in order to ensure our survival. And it's there and set up for us to be resilient when we are in distress. So during this time, when our kids are having a very difficult time, when we're having a really difficult time, there is something that science tells us that will make a big difference for us, and that is our connections, our attachment figures. Who are our people that will help us feel connected and protected? Okay, so all of this is what we're going to dive into. So if secure attachment is one of the best predictors for how well our kids turn out, how do we provide it for them? How do we cultivate secure attachment for them? How do we know if we've done that? How do we keep doing that? That will be our focus. Now, I'll just be really brief in mentioning one thing that is really important, but it's not going to be the focus of our talk. The single best predictor for how well we are able to provide secure attachment to our children and our partners and our other relationships, but we're going to focus on parent-child right now, is not whether or not we had secure attachment with our own caregivers. And we should all breathe a big sigh of relief, because about 40% of people do not have secure attachment with their parents, their caregivers. So whether your primary caregivers are your parents or your grandparents or whoever that is, the best, and this is good to have this is super hopeful, because about 40% of us, like I said, had a more insecure pattern of attachment. And I won't go into the details of that. There are actually different patterns that have different profiles, which are based on the kinds of repeated experiences we have in relationship and how people showed up for us. So some examples of that might be if you grew up in an emotional desert, and when you were in distress or upset, your caregivers, your parents were not the people you could turn to. They really didn't want to deal with emotions. They didn't really want to deal with vulnerabilities. You were really on your own when that happened. That would be one example. Another type of insecure pattern of attachment would be if you had parents who were really unpredictable, who sometimes showed up for you and took care of you, but other times didn't, and you really couldn't rely on them. Or maybe you even had to take care of them, where you had to make them feel protected and connected. So those are two of several different patterns of attachment that would be more the insecure patterns of attachment, where your caregivers were not providing you with predictable, sensitive care. You could not count on them to be there for you when you needed them. Now, 40% of us had some version of that. And so thank goodness the research says the best predictor for how well we provide it to our kids is not whether or not we had it. Here's what the research says. The best predictor is whether or not you have reflected on those experiences and made sense of them. So that can be done through journaling. It can be done through therapy. It can be done through being in other relationships where people over time have shown up for you and you predictably come to know that people will be there for you. This is really about making sense of our own story. So it might be some version of, gosh, my parents were really young when they had me, and I think they were doing their best, but they just didn't have much capacity to really be there for me. So I was on my own a lot. No one really was there. And so I was kind of alone a lot. And that was really hard for me. And I've looked at how that has impacted who I am, how it makes me sometimes have some walls up in relationships because I'm not used to relying on other people. So that's something I have to work on. And I want to really make sure I show up emotionally for my kids and to really be present as opposed to kind of cutting off from hard things and emotions. So that example would be kind of someone who had maybe not secure attachment, but has reflected on it and has made sense of their story, has reflected on how it impacts them and how they want to be different. That's the best predictor for how well we are able to provide that for our children. So that is an ongoing journey. And those of you who have adolescents, you know that our kids keep giving us opportunities to make sense of and work through stuff from our past. And so really that's an ongoing journey as a parent. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about our kids triggering us. But what I want to focus the rest of our time on, and I will have time for questions at the end. So make sure and jot down some questions or go ahead and put them in the Q&A as you're thinking of them. Here's what I want to focus on now. What can we do besides doing our work and our reflection and making sense of our own story? What can we do in the everyday moments of parenting to cultivate this really important thing? Probably the most important thing that we can provide to our kids, showing up for them. How do we do it? How do we do it in the discipline moments? How do we do it when we feel like we don't have any reserves left? How do we do it when our kids don't want us to comfort them? Like, how do we know what to do? And so Dan and I, my co-author, Dan Siegel, and I love to come up with things that help parents remember ideas. And so in this book, we talk about the 4 S's of secure attachment. And I'm going to walk through each of those. And give some really specific things related to the pandemic, as well as we are really still very much in this really difficult time in our history that will, affect our lives for the foreseeable future. Okay, so the first one is safe. So let me just tell you what they are, and then we'll walk through each of them. Safe, seen, soothed, and it's a really hard word to say, soothed, and secure. So the first one is safe, and it's the most important one. So I'm going to spend the most time talking about safety. So I'm just giving you that as a sort of front loading you there, so that if you're noticing the clock and you're like, gosh, she spent a lot of time on safe, like there's no way she's going to get to the other ones. I promise I will get to the other ones. We need to spend the most time on safe because it's the most important. We really want to make sure that we are not violating our child's sense of feeling safe with us as their caregivers. So we're going to focus on that right now, especially because the world feels so unsafe right now. It's even more important that as parents, we show up in ways that help our kids feel safe. So let me just define what I mean. Safe is for sure protecting our children from harm. And most of us are pretty good at that kind of thing. We put them in their car seats. We take them to the doctor when they're sick. We watch them when they're young near water. When they're adolescents, we make sure that we've talked to them about not getting in the car with someone who's been drinking and not drinking and driving themselves. So we as parents spend a lot of time focusing on making sure we're protecting our children from harm. In fact, primary caregivers, whether that is a mother or a father, like they've studied this in gay male couples. And this is not just a biological pregnancy, breastfeeding mother thing. The primary caregiver in those relationships also had this change. So it's the primary caregiver actually has changes to the amygdala, which is a part of the limbic midbrain that helps us watch for danger so that we can protect our young. So we actually have changes in our amygdala when we become primary caregivers that can cause us to be more anxious, can cause us to be hyper vigilant about the surroundings, can cause us to be, on guard to make sure we're protecting our children. So our brain adapts as mammals for us to be able to do that well. Sometimes it's a curse though, right? Because we're constantly thinking about all the things that can go wrong, but that's nature's way of helping us provides this safety part of our attachments. Okay, so protecting them from harm. The other thing I mean when I'm talking about safety is making sure we are not the source of violating that. And we are not the source of fear or terror for our children. So let's break that down a little bit more. What are some ways we violate our child's sense of safety? Now, one really important thing around this is that we as parents have to know that our children are looking to us to find out if something is okay or not. And you might remember this, or you may be experiencing now if you have young children. If you have a young child and they hear a really loud noise, or sometimes even when they fall, before they begin to cry, they immediately look at you. And they look at you, and if you look like startled, they may begin to cry or get really afraid, like that must have been terrifying, right? But if they look at you and you have a calm face, like it's okay, I'm right here, brush off the dirt. That hurt a little bit, but you're okay, right? Like so, they hear a loud noise, and we are kind of interested in the sound. We're curious about it, but we don't look afraid. The way we respond gives our children cues. We are actually constructing the meaning of whether something is safe or dangerous. So one of the ways that we really want to help promote safety for our kids is to give the sense that we are competent and confident that we can keep them safe most of the time. Now, obviously, we have things that we worry about, and it's scarier as they get older, and we really truly don't know that we can keep them safe. But let me give an example of a violation of this. So, and I actually made a video of this. I'm not sure if it's been put out on my social media or not yet. I try to make several in a row, like when I actually have makeup on, because I like to not wear a lot of makeup. So when I have makeup on, I usually make like 4 or 5 videos, and then I'm never sure when they get posted by my team. But one of the videos I just made, I'm in California, and so no one's in school right now. But there's already talk about kids going back to school. And one of the things that's happening is no matter how big your house is, kids are watching us and are overhearing us all the time, just like you're overhearing your kids all the time. And by the way, child development, and particularly preteen and teen development, is not meant to be watched this closely by parents. You know, them being under a microscope and us overhearing the conversations, it should never be this way. But they're overhearing us too. So let's say your kid is about to begin an activity, like that sport has been opened back up, or that church activity has been opened back up, or your kid is able to go back to school, and your kid's feeling some nerves about it, for good reason, feeling some anxiety about whether or not it's safe and is this going to be okay. And they overhear you talking to your friend or your co-parent, whether that's through, the text, microphone where you're speaking a text, or they're hearing you on the phone with someone, and you're saying like, I have no idea why the school is doing this. I mean, this is the worst idea ever. This is not going to end well. So they're hearing us say those kinds of things to our friends or our co-parent out of our own worries. They're hearing it, and then we're like, go to school, right? So it's really important that we give our kids the sense that I've got you. I'm in charge of making sure you're safe, and you're in charge of making sure you're safe as well. But I'm really watching here, and I'm going to make sure it's going to be okay. Now, that's not 100% true. We can't, of course, protect our children from getting sick necessarily. I mean, certain ways, obviously, we can make better choices, etc. But there are a lot of things as parents we can't control, but it's really important our kids feel from us that we are going to be watching, and we're going to be in charge of trying to keep them safe. If we don't do that, then they have to be hyper vigilant in the world to watch out for their own safety. And that takes a lot of attentional and emotional energy away from their own learning, their own curious exploration, their own ability to just be kids. Another way we can violate their sense of safety is when we as parents, not if, but when we as parents flip our lids and lose our cool and become unpredictable. So I'll just give one of many examples I could give you. But one night I was playing board games with my kids. We were playing Yahtzee. They were young at the time. Um, and they were fighting with each other, and they just kept escalating. I was exhausted, and I didn't handle it well. Eventually, I started out by being just really immature. I can't believe you guys are, doing all this, like, great fun. This is so much fun, guys. I'm so glad we're doing this, like getting sarcastic and immature. Eventually, to where I've totally flipped my lid and I threw the dice across the room and completely lost it. Now, in that moment, right after it happened, I caught myself, and I immediately was able to make a repair with my kid, which I'll talk about in just a minute. We now refer to it as the Yahtzee incident. But what's so important is, like, I'm predictable, I'm calm, I'm patient, I'm a problem solver, I'm caring for my child, and then things escalate and I yell at my kids or I throw the dice across the room. So I become unpredictable. Anytime we become unpredictable as caregivers, it can be very frightening for our children. So that can be when we lose it with our kid. It can be when we scream and yell in aggressive, not respectful ways with our child's co-parent, if we have one, whether we're married to them or not. If we have big fights, or we're really rude and reactive in public settings, like you're getting really mad at the teller at the bank, whatever it is, when we have these moments where we lose it, our children's experience is they are not in charge, they are not in control, so they cannot keep me safe. So just having those moments where we become unpredictable and we lose it really does violate our child's sense of safety in us as secure attachment figures. But here's one of the best parts of this science, and that is that we can mess up all the time as long as we make a repair. So really what we're talking about here is keeping our kids safe, not being the source of their fear or terror. And so here are the action statements. 1, be predictable if you can be, but when you're not, make the repair. And the repair is something like making sure you're calm enough to do it and saying, I really handled that terribly. I am so sorry. I really wish I had handled that differently. I shouldn't have yelled. I shouldn't have thrown the dice. And I am so sorry. I sounded scary. And I would really like your forgiveness. I might even ask for a do-over. Can I have a do-over? So we just go and make it right with our kids. And what's so great about that is when we mess up and we always make a repair with our kids, we make things right with them. Even the unpredictable moments become predictable. And it widens our children's window of tolerance. It widens our children's window of tolerance. That's a big mouthful, but it's super important. It widens what they can tolerate in relationships. So what that means is if you were perfect and lovely all the time and you never had any conflict with your kid, when your kid first had their first friend or their first romantic relationship and there was conflict, they would think the relationship was over. So what you're doing is you're helping your child have an experience that's like, gosh, relationships have conflict in them. And sometimes they're messy and sometimes things don't feel good between us. And it always gets okay. Like we can make things right, right? So your child is like, yeah, she was really scary and crazy just a minute ago, but I know she's going to come make things right with me. She's going to come, things are going to feel good again in a little bit as soon as we get to connect. So it's really valuable, not only in modeling how to make repairs, but actually in helping your child be more resilient in relationships. So you can just take a sigh of relief that those mistakes we make as parents, when we repair them, are actually really beneficial for our kids. So we don't have to be even close to perfect. I'd also like to encourage you as a takeaway here, that when you find yourself having those moments as a parent, it can be a really important moment to be curious yourself, to ask yourself, like, what got in the way of me being the parent I wanted to be in that moment? Or what was that about for me? And sometimes the answer is, I haven't peed by myself in 4 years and I'm so hungry and I'm exhausted. And this kid has been, at this for an hour and I just don't have it in me. Right. And that may be the meaning of it. Or it might be when my kid pushes back like that, I actually feel really angry. And when I explore that, how angry I am, I actually truly feel really afraid. I feel afraid that my child is too fragile or my child is too indulged, and that they're not going to do well in the world. That's what I'm really afraid of. And so it's really an opportunity to kind of become curious. It's also an opportunity to reflect for ourselves. This is back what I was talking about doing our own work, to say, gosh, when my child rejects me or whatever it is, I get really triggered and I feel really insecure. And that makes me want to get really controlling. And so I need to be aware of that, because once we become aware of our own triggers and how things from the past may be really influencing how we're reacting in the moment, once we have awareness, we can begin to have a choice about how we're going to handle things. Otherwise, we just continue to go on automatic pilot. So make a repair. Try not to be the source of your child's fear. And then a couple other things that are pandemic related about helping your child feel that you are going to help keep them safe. One is to just change our language just a little bit. And you're going to get a video link about this. I've made a 3 or 4 minute video about this. I'll tell you the idea now, but in case you want to share it or go back and watch it again, language matters. It matters a lot. And so if we are using safety-based messaging, or if we are using threat-based messaging, we can have a huge impact on how our child experiences what's happening. Like I said, we actually truly are meaning makers for our children. They mirror our states, but they also are really looking to us as to what the meaning of what's happening is. So if you say to your child, you can't participate in that activity because it's dangerous. I mean, people are going to get sick, and so it's not safe. When you say that over and over and over in different contexts right now, it's not safe. That's dangerous. When we say that repeatedly, know that the brain adapts based on repeated experiences. So when I lift when I lift a weight, my muscle builds. So the more repetitions I do, the more reps I do, the stronger that muscle's going to be. And that's how our brain works too. So if your kid is getting a lot of reps around how dangerous things are, how dangerous, not safe, we're not doing that because it's dangerous. Someone's going to get sick. If we do that threat-based messaging all the time, your kid's going to get a lot of reps about how dangerous things are. And in children particularly, that can get generalized to everything. So it can really activate a sense of anxiety in your kids for when they have to begin to transition back to their activities in school and play dates and things like that. What we want to do instead is use safety-based messaging. We're still going to restrict particular activities for safety, but we're going to say, we're taking a break on doing this activity so that we can be safe. We're washing our hands so that we can be safe, as opposed to we're washing our hands because there are germs and it's dangerous and we can get sick. So just really we're focusing on, we're not seeing grandma right now so that she can be safe and that we can be safe. So you're just focusing on safety. So then your kid gets lots and lots of reps around being safe, and I'm keeping you safe. So that when it's time to go back into something, your child has had a lot of reps of, my parent keeps me safe. We do things to be safe, as opposed to everything's dangerous, everything's frightening. So it's really important that we shift our language. If you've been doing more threat-based language, don't worry. Just make that shift. Again, the brain is, especially in childhood and adolescence, is incredibly plastic. It's changeable and adaptive based on our experiences. So any shift you make, your child's brain will respond and adapt to that. So just start making that shift now. The last suggestion I have for you under safety right now is that the brain hates what's unpredictable. Unpredictability means the same thing as threat in our brains. So when our brains and our nervous systems are experiencing a sense of threat, it makes us much more reactive. So it's not at all surprising that children are having more tantrums right now, that parents are dealing with more acting out behavioral issues, that children and adolescents are having higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidality. I mean, they were even before the pandemic, the greatest numbers in our history, and even higher now. Because when a threat is present, it actually, our nervous system is programmed to go into threat response, which is much more the fight, flight, freeze, or collapse, faint. Um, Figuratively speaking, much more than actual fainting, but shutting down, being depressed, pulling away from things. So what we want to do is create a sense of predictability. Right now, the world is so unpredictable and the things keep changing. So my kids were supposed to be able to go back to school right after the holidays. Then that changed again. Then they were supposed to come back in February. Now they're saying don't count on February. So things keep changing and being unpredictable. So what do I, as a parent, do to create this sense of I will keep you safe? I'm going to create some predictability for my kids. So I do that through simple things. Some of those things can be kind of front loading the week. So on Sunday, say, hey, let's talk about the week. Tuesday, you've got guitar lessons after school, obviously virtual. And we're going to do family movie night on Friday night. My family, we're really into this show. Oh my gosh, what is it? Yellowstone, this show Yellowstone, that's really great right now. So I kind of talked to my kids, like my kids have a lot of time off on Wednesdays during their virtual school. So I was like, get your work done so that we can watch Yellowstone. So Wednesday nights are Yellowstone night. So after I'm done tonight, I've already got dinner in the oven. So we'll have dinner and then we'll watch Yellowstone. So Wednesday nights are Yellowstone night. Every Wednesday night, I put oatmeal in a crock pot that I do overnight in the crock pot. So Thursday morning, we wake up to hot oatmeal with berries and a little bit of brown sugar. Tuesday nights are taco nights, Friday nights or Sunday nights or family movie nights. The other one night, Friday night, Sunday night, one is a game night. The other is family movie night. Or maybe you take a walk after dinner. Maybe you have a playlist that your kid helps you create that you play in the morning before school. My family clearly has a lot of food related traditions and predictability, but even just having, some routines and predictability around what happens before school, what happens during lunchtime if they're home, what happens after school, what happens on the weekend. By Friday night, I'm usually so tired. So I've recently declared that Friday night is pizza night because I'm not cooking on Friday nights. And I'm like, this is the plan from here forward until I change my mind. So really just creating some predictability, talking about what's coming, and then having things that your kids can count on. That can be really, really soothing to the nervous system and the brain. And it's really good for us too. Okay, so that's safe. Now let's move to seen. Seen is really hard to do. I'm going to just warn you right now. It's hard because what it means is looking at what your child is actually experiencing and joining with them in what they're feeling, really seeing them for who they are and what they're experiencing in the moment. What that requires of us is to look beyond the behavior. Oh, and that's so hard to do. So hard to do. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I guess let me say one more thing about that. The goal of seen long term is that your kid as a grown up or as a, young adult says, my parents really got me. They really knew who I was. They really understood me most of the time, and they loved me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. That's kind of the long-term big goal. The short-term goal is that what your child is feeling and experiencing and the way you respond are a match. So let me give you an example. I'll give you a younger kid example, and I'll give you an older kid example. So when my son was about 4, he was having bath time, and I don't need to go into the why he was having a meltdown because you all know basically that there was even though he had a bunch of Lego guys in the bathtub with him, there was a particular Lego guy that wasn't in the bath and he wanted that particular guy. So you guys know that whole scenario. You can paint the rest of the details. So he was really melty. He was starting to tantrum, getting bigger and bigger. So because I've practiced a lot, I know that I need to be um, the safe harbor in his storm. Actually, that's one other thing about safe. Let me just jump back for 1 second. That's another way I think about it, is that whatever storm is happening in my child's life, in their feelings or in the world, that my job is to create a safe harbor so that their boat can come into this safe harbor and be protected. So I want my home to be a safe harbor. I want my relationship with my child to be a safe harbor. So that's kind of one of the ways to think about that. So as I'm walking into this bath time, I'm there with him and it's escalating. And so I do a little self-talk. I'm a trained mental health professional, so I know how to do this. And I just say to myself, okay, Tina, he's really going to be falling apart here. And this is not going to be fun. And it's going to be really hard. And you can do it. He needs you to be calm. Because if you're not and you match his reactivity, you're just going to make things worse and it's going to be a lose-lose for both of you. So you need to be the calm in the storm. So I kind of prepare myself mentally as it's escalating. And so I do this self-talk, right? So I take some deep breaths so I'm ready for this moment. I say, it's time to get out of the bathtub. Would you like to get out yourself, or would you like for me to help you get out? Okay, so by the way, what I'm about to talk about for the whole rest of the time is a lot about being emotionally responsive to our kids and soothing them and comforting them and giving them tons of empathy. But by no means, please do not misunderstand me. This is not permissiveness. I am not a fan of permissive parenting. When we have high expectations and we have boundaries that we enforce, that actually helps our kids feel safer. So please know, this is not about indulging our kids and being like, oh, you're so sad about not getting out of the bathtub. Okay, you can stay longer. No, not what I'm talking about. Boundaries are so important. And we can change our minds about boundaries and things like that if we want to. It doesn't have to be rigid. So in this moment, I say, it's time to get out. Would you like to get out, or would you like me to get you out? And he says, I'm not getting out. And he's screaming and he's splashing me. Again, I try to just keep in my mind, this is really helpful for me. I imagine that his volume dial on his nervous system is turned all the way up. And my job is to help turn the volume down on his reactivity. So I try to stay calm myself. So he says, I'm not getting out. And I say, okay, I'm going to help you out of the tub. And as I lift his body out of the tub, I'm going to practice seen. And what seen means is that what he's feeling and how I respond are a match. So I'm going to say, you're so mad that you have to get out of the bath. You really, really wanted to stay in and have that other Lego guy be in the bath with you. Is that right? So in that moment, what I've said is I'm looking past the behavior. What I want to do in the moment is to say, if you're going to scream and yell like that, we're not having bedtime stories tonight. You'll be totally going to sleep on your own. And I'm not kidding. Like, stop right now, or you're not getting bedtime stories. That's what I want to do. That's a whole other talk about from my No Drama Discipline book and approach. But the whole point and purpose of discipline is to teach and build skills so that they become self-disciplined and handle themselves better over time. If I throw out a threat like that, it just makes everything worse and makes it less likely he can actually learn, because his brain's not even in a receptive state in which to learn. And so in that moment, instead of doing that, which basically makes him feel like she doesn't understand how angry I am, she doesn't understand how I'm feeling, I can say to him, you're so angry that bath time is over. Is that right? Yeah, that's so hard when you really want to do something and it doesn't work that way. It's so frustrating. And I wrap the towel around him and we move on. And I'll come back to that story when I get to soothed. But that's the key in that moment. It's so hard though, because when our kids' behavior is really reactive, especially when they're attacking us, then we can get really reactive ourselves. And then we totally are focused on the behavior and not at what our child's internal landscape is. When we can really see our child's experience and meet them there and give them some reflection that we understand them, then they get the words that go with those emotions. So it helps build their emotional vocabulary. When we actually name what they're feeling, it actually reduces reactivity in the right hemisphere. We talk about the science behind that in our strategy, Name It to Tame It, in the Whole Brain Child as well. So there's all kinds of benefits that happen there. Imagine you have, imagine your child is afraid about something and like a spider in their room. Well, we do this kind of thing all the time where we're like, there are spiders everywhere. There's really not much I can do. Like, you really shouldn't just freak out about them that much. Never do kids be like, okay, great, that's really helpful. I'm not afraid anymore. It doesn't work that way. So when we tell them to not be afraid or not to worry or not to be so sad, not only does it not change how they feel, but they also have the experience of, okay, she doesn't get it. She doesn't get how I'm feeling. And now I'm alone in this feeling. Okay, so this is really about validating our child's experience. As your kids get older, one example right now that's very appropriate for our times is your kid might be really whining and complaining about having to do school online or not seeing their friends or whatever. And if we respond in that moment with, you're lucky. A lot of people don't even have computers to do school or to even connect with their friends. And, a lot of people are really struggling right now. Like, you have no right to complain about that. That is the opposite of seen. A couple of things happen when we respond like that. One is our kids like, you don't get me. They also experience, I can't talk to you. Or if we respond in ways that make them feel criticized or that don't feel good to them, their brain and nervous system is an association machine. So when we kind of are hard on them when they share something with us, even if they're being annoying in the way that they do it, right? If we go, you know what, I don't know why you're making such a big deal about that. Or you're so lucky, or, you're so spoiled. Whenever we respond in a way that doesn't feel good, their brain is like, compute, sharing feelings with mom doesn't feel good. Don't do that again. So when we communicate, I don't want to hear it, they internalize that and we will stop hearing it. So it's so important to peel back the behaviors and really focus on what is my kid experiencing, and I'm going to reflect that back to them. Now, that does not mean you don't address the behavior. I mean, I remember one time I offered to take my kid to the movies, and when he asked if he could get popcorn and I said no, he started pouting and I got really mad. I was like, really? I'm going to take you to the movies and you're complaining about popcorn? Like, you're so spoiled. And what happened in that moment then is my kid really was feeling disappointed. When we get excited about something we think could happen and it doesn't happen, we feel disappointed. That is a normal, healthy human emotion, right? So I could say to my kid, oh, when I said that and you heard no popcorn, you felt really disappointed. Is that right? And he could say, yeah, I love popcorn and you got it for me last time. And I can say, yeah, I know this time we're not going to do it. But I know it can feel so hard to not have things go the way you want them to. I know that's hard. Now, when I do that, I also hold my boundary. I don't say, okay, fine, you can have popcorn. I hold my boundary. I'm not buying the popcorn, but I've given my kid the experience of, yeah, it's okay to feel disappointed. And I can handle your feelings. I'm not going to fall apart or criticize you when you share them with me. But in that moment, my reaction of like, seriously, like you're going to complain about that. What I take from that moment also is that behavior is communication, and the way our kids behave, and this is again part of the discipline stuff from the Whole Brain Child, from No Drama Discipline, is that they communicate to us the areas they don't yet have skills. So when my kid pouts in that moment, he's basically saying to me, hey mom, I need some skill building around handling disappointment more gracefully. And I maybe have expectations that are kind of, a little out of sync with the needs of the world right now. So it activates for me a fear that my kid is spoiled. So in that moment, I go, okay, note to self, I want to do some perspective giving to my kid, and I want to foster some gratitude. So those are some skills I'm going to work on by giving them practice doing those things. So what can I do? Okay, at dinner for the next month, we're going to all go around the table and share one thing we're grateful for every day. And I'm going to bring some things into the dinner conversation around perspective and about need in the world. But in this moment, those are skills to build. But in this moment, my kid's disappointed and I can show up for him right then when he's feeling disappointed. And kids are having more disappointments and more difficult things right now. So they may be complaining more right now. They may be fussing more right now. They may be acting out more right now. Really focus on helping them feel seen by tuning into their experience and meeting them there. The third S is soothed, and soothed is simply nurturing, helping, comforting. So in the bathtub story, when my son was screaming and yelling, and I said, I know you're so angry that bath time is over, I wrap the towel around him. And then I say to him, if you need to cry for a while, it's okay to cry. And I'm right here with you while you're crying. So that's really simple language. Another time, this same kid was thrashing like a fish out of water when he didn't get to stay up later with the older boys. And he was really angry and it wasn't fair. And, and you're so mean and, all of this stuff really reacting. Again, I want to be like, okay, I'm done reading then if you're going to cry and scream and yell, right? But so much better for me in the moment to say it's so hard when it feels not fair. To say, it's really hard to feel disappointed, and I'll lay here with you and stay with you while you're feeling this. What I do in that moment when we do that is we give our kids also the message that I trust that you can handle big feelings and I can handle your big feelings. And do you know how resilience is built? Resilience is built from practicing dealing with difficult emotions and difficult situations with enough support. So that's where soothed comes in. That's the difference between our children being more fragile from adversity and being more resilient from adversity, is whether or not we show up for them in those moments, right? So soothing can be, another fancy word for soothing is co-regulating. So basically at your child's worst, when they're falling apart the most, they're the most afraid, the most angry, the most acting out, that is actually when they need you the most as an attachment figure. Remember, attachment's job is to regulate emotions and to regulate physiological states. So if your kid is red in the face, muscles are tense, they're having a massive tantrum, or your teenager is like totally angry at you and screaming and yelling or mad at someone else, in those moments, that's when they need us the most. And so what we're going to do in that moment is think about, how do I help turn my child's reactivity down? Because when we're in really reactive states, whether that's like depressed, shut down, withdrawn, or acting out, anxious, angry, whatever, either one of those states is a reactive state. And so that's when our kids absolutely need us the most. And so what we're going to do is say, how can I nurture my child? How can I comfort my child? How can I help my child? So you saw in the story, I talked about wrapping the towel around my son. There are a lot of physical comforts that we need to not minimize. Many of you may really want fuzzy, cozy clothes and shoes and blankets right now, and our kids do too. Physical sensory comforts nurture us. Warm beverages and warm food is comforting and soothing. Certain types of music are more soothing and comforting. So this is one way we can do this. Another way we can soothe our kids is through touch, hugging, arm around them, even your teenagers. If your teenagers are pushing you away, you can say, I need a hug. And say, or you know what, we're going to start doing hugs right after dinner if you don't want to do it right before bed because you want to be up in your room by yourself or whatever. So, and even if your kids act like they don't want to be touched, they really, it makes a huge difference for their nervous system. If they don't want to hug you and that's too weird and awkward for you, while they're sitting eating breakfast, go up and just rub their back and pat their back a few times and be like, do you have a big day ahead of you? Like, it doesn't have to be this like stare into each other's eyes and, have this deep, intimate moment. It doesn't have to be that. In fact, probably would not work at all for teenagers or, but younger kids would, many of them. So physical touch, if even 8, 9, 10-year-olds might still enjoy rocking or snuggled up next to you. My 14-year-old, we were watching the inauguration this morning, put his head on my shoulder. I put my head on his head. I stayed there and did not move until he was ready to move. So these are really important ways we can do this, is through sensory stuff, through physical touch. But here's the most important part of soothing. Really about being in the moment with your kid with your presence. So it's really about showing up in that moment. And I wish I had learned this earlier, but it's incredibly liberating as a parent to realize that when your child is really having a hard time, even if that's directed at you, that it's a very stressful experience to be out of control like that or to be feeling those big emotions. And I feel like as parents, we spend so much time, so much mental energy, so much emotional energy, and so much attention when our kids are having a hard time, trying to figure out how to fix it, how to figure out the situation. Like, what do I do here? What do I say? Like, do I give in here? Or what else can I do? Or how can I fix this? Or how do I solve this? And what I'm saying to you here from the research is that, and this is so liberating, is that we don't have to figure out what to do. It's more about who we are in that moment and about showing up. All we have to really do is to be present and to be with them, to walk with them through it, to say some version of, that's really hard. That seems really confusing. I can see that you're really angry, whatever it is. And with teenagers, sometimes better to just go generic, like, wow, this is a really hard day. Or you seem like you're having a hard time, keeping it generic, because then they're gonna be like, you don't understand anything if you try to name a specific emotion, depending on your kid. To say this, it seems like it's a really tough day for you, or you seem like you're having a really hard time. And I'm right here. I'm here with you. You can say, or you can say, how can I help? So if you say you seem like you're having a really hard time, how can I help? Just offering that can be so powerful for our kids to know we've got them. And at their worst, we're going to show up and we're there for them. Now, don't confuse this with bubble wrapping your kid and doing everything for them. I'm not talking about protecting them from the world and doing everything for them. That's not good for them. And I can clarify that more if there are questions about that. What I'm talking about is you showing up with your presence and saying, you're not alone in whatever this is. And even if your kids push you away, you can even just say, I'm here if you need me. I remind my kids of that all the time. I have a kid in college who just left and I won't see him till May. He knows this. I've said it a million times. I want my kids, when I say I love you, I'm here for you always. I want them to be like, yeah, whatever. So boring. Like, I want them to feel bored by that because they've heard it and know it so much. So what we can say to them is, I will always listen. Seem like you're having a hard day. I'm here if you need me. Bring them a glass of water, bring them a snack. Kids of any age, but even teenagers, leaving them a sticky note on their mirror of just saying, like, hope you have a great day. Take a baby picture or a funny picture of them from toddlerhood and leave it on their bed, leave it on their desk. Little micro moments where you're really letting them know, like, I'm here, you're part of a family. So those are some really important ways. The idea is that when our kids are having a hard time, we soothe them, we comfort them, we nurture them, even while we hold boundaries. Now, here's the fourth S, which is secure. And this is the really sort of punchline of this whole talk. When our kids have not perfect, but enough predictable experiences of feeling safe, of feeling seen, of feeling soothed, particularly when things were hard, feeling safe, seen, and soothed, especially when things are hard, they will develop that fourth S of secure. And I don't mean I feel secure in myself. What I mean when I say secure is secure attachment, but what I specifically mean is that their brains have wired, based on all of these reps, based on all of these repeated, not perfect experiences of you helping them feel safe, seen, and soothed, their brain has wired to know and expect that if they have a need, you're going to show up for them, that you're going to be there, that you're going to see it and respond quickly and sensitively to whatever their need is. Again, you don't have to be perfect. It's just enough times. And in fact, there's some research that shows that even the most attuned parents who are responding contingently to their children's shifting needs and states in infancy are only doing that about 30% of the time. So there's a lot of leeway for us to not feel like we have to be perfect all the time. So when our kids feel safe, seen, and soothed enough times, their brains get wired for secure attachment to know that you're going to show up for them. But something else even more amazing happens, and that is that they learn how to show up for themselves. They learn as they become adolescents and young adults to keep themselves safe, to see and understand themselves, to have awareness of what's happening because you've helped them make sense of that over time, and to soothe themselves, which might even be reaching out to talk to you. It might be spending time with a friend. It might be being alone and listening to music. But their brain has had a lot of reps and experiences of going from falling apart back into being regulated again and being back in control of themselves, where they can make changes and be to show up in the world. So you are actually wiring their brains so that they know how to show up for themselves and how to show up for their romantic partners, their friends, and their future children. So I'm going to end on two final ideas, and I know we're about to Q&A time. This is my guiding North Star. There are a lot of times as a wife, a best friend, a daughter, and especially as a parent, where I'm not sure exactly how to handle something. My teenager does something really risky that scares the crap out of me, right? How do I respond in the moment? What do I do, right? My toddler's throwing a fit about something. Whatever's happening in the moment, what do I do? And this has become my compass, my North Star that says, okay, I'm not sure exactly what to say. I'm not sure exactly what to do, but I know that the 4 S's is the answer. I'm going to help my kid feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure, knowing I'm going to show up for them no matter what in the way I respond here. And that is so powerful. It gives me really a guide. So it's an easy idea, but it's not always easy to do. So a couple of things about that. One, the more you practice, the more reps you give yourself showing up for your kids in this way, the easier and more automatic it will become for you. So just know it takes some practice for it to become automatic for you. Number two, there is always hope, because the brain is incredibly plastic. The most plastic periods of our brain, the most changeable based on our experiences, are in the first 3 years and during adolescence. So even if you have young adults or adolescent or preteen kids, it is not too late. The moment for any of our kids that we start to shift and make an adjustment to say, gosh, I haven't been really showing up for my kids in the way that I want to, in the way that I think that they need, I'm going to start doing that. Know that your child's brain will start getting that firing and wiring based on those new experiences. And you truly can not just change their behaviors, their character, their development, but actually how their brains get wired. So this is super important. What you do really matters here, and it's never too late. So there's tons of hope there. Now, while this is an easy idea in theory, it's hard to do. I want to say one more thing about that, and that is that you need someone to show up for you too. This is hard work. Who shows up for you? As a parent, especially if you're a single parent, are there people who help you feel safe, who help you feel seen and soothed? Some of you may be married to someone who doesn't provide those 4 S's for you, but you've got a best friend who does, or you have a parent who does, or you have a sibling who does. We all need somebody who helps us feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And we need to show up for ourselves. So we need to really make sure we're doing things for ourselves that soothe us, that provide us with enough restoration so that we have the capacity to really be present, particularly when our kids are having a hard time, so we can show up in those moments. One final thought, and then I'll stop for questions. What I want to say to you more than anything else, people are asking me this question: how are the kids going to be okay? How do we make it so that they come out of this okay? What are the tricks and magic bullets? And the truth is, there kind of is one. It's not perfect. But my answer to that question is exactly the main point of the power of showing up and what this research says. And that is this: what your child needs most from you for their optimal development, for the hard moments in the moment and for their development over time. What your child needs most from you is you, flawed you, imperfect you, falling apart at times you, but you. You are enough. You showing up as best you can is the most important thing for your child's brain and for them to become resilient, wonderful people. You're hard on yourself. You're harder on yourself than you should be, but you are the one that they need most. And so take care of yourself so that you can do that well. That's a lot, but that's what your kids need, is just you showing up, connecting with them, being there for them, and make sure you're doing that for yourself as well. Okay, Amy, I'm ready for questions.
Oh, Maddie, can you start my video? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Tina, you give us such hope, and that's what we need more than anything. So thank you for spending an hour giving us that extraordinary download. And so we have some fantastic questions in the chat and in the Q&A, excuse me. The first one is, how do I split the difference between letting my daughter continue to quote unquote feed the want monster or the worry bug and seeing her feeling of worry? Her worries can start to spiral and I'm wanting to help her not feed them. Could you give an example of how to respond to an irrational what if spiral?
Yeah, that's so important. And that can happen, that we can get stuck in that connection part where we're like, I know it's so hard. You're feeling really scared about that. You're feeling really nervous about that. And you're really connecting with them in the big feelings. And then it just seems like it goes and goes and goes and goes. And you feel like maybe you're even reinforcing it. That's what I hear in the question. And I get that question all the time. So in the Whole Brain Child, one of the strategies Dan and I talk about is the idea of letting the clouds of emotions roll by. And that's the idea that we can even think about our emotions as the weather, right? So clouds can come and then clouds go. We don't want to stay in the cloudy area always, right? So in that moment, it's really important that we, and every kid is different. Like one kid, you might say, yeah, you're feeling really nervous about that, aren't you? And your kid's like, yeah, I guess I am. And then just that helps them move out of it. Other kids need to talk about it longer and to kind of stay in it longer. So, but we really don't want our kids to be stuck there. So we need to be sensitive, contingent listeners and do that seen and soothed thing where we really bring empathy and connection and listen. And here's what I hear you saying. And then we need to show our kids that we can help them. And part of soothed isn't just like, I know that's hard, honey. Part of soothed is helping them not get stuck there. It's helping them remember. And so part of it is like, we've been you might even say something as simple as, we've been talking about this for a long while. We've been talking about this. We've used our words around this. And now I think it's time for us to just change what we're doing right now and to move into problem solving. So you can even ask, like, you're feeling really worried. How can I help? And if your kid's like, I don't know. And you're like, why don't we try to get a snack? Or let's go outside for a minute. So really just helping them. You're not dismissing their emotions. You're being present to them, but you're not stuck there and you're moving on. When your child is really irrational, though, getting them to move into problem solving won't happen until they're more regulated. So you may need to use touch. You may need to use rocking. Another couple of things that can help regulate the nervous system when kids are really reactive and irrational is movement. So as you and your child are talking, rolling a ball back and forth or saying, come on, let's go walk while we talk. If you just throw a pillow at them and then say, throw it back, having them moving while they're talking, that can also help move them out of that and release some of that nervous system arousal. Playing keep it up with a balloon, that kind of thing. So movement can help, as can laughter. Now we have to be careful so that our child doesn't feel like we're laughing at them or we're minimizing what they're doing. But really just saying, if you were to, like, you're feeling so anxious or whatever, if you were to be the most anxious animal you could be, let's be that animal together. I'm going to do it. You should tell me, how can I be more worried as an animal, right? It's trying to move into play and playfulness. Anytime We introduce play or playfulness, like even you using an accent or taking on a character or something like that. Um, Anxiety states and play states are fairly incompatible. So we can really move kids out of those anxious states. So I would acknowledge the feelings, and then I would help your child move on. Movement can help with that, play can move with that. And even just saying, we've been talking about this a while, now let's be problem solvers and take a break from this for a little while. We can come back to it later if we need. So feel free to move on from it once you've acknowledged it.
Great, thank you. The next question is, would you recommend sharing with your children that things were different when you were a child? The discipline looked very different when we were growing up. So many times I have blown things up or not acted well with them. And right after, my thought is, wow, I just acted like my mom. And then I go cry. Or is that just making an excuse for yourself? And she also wanted to add that PS, she's getting much better at making a repair. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Awesome. The repair is everything, right? We never want our children to be in the role of our therapists, right? So we never want to say, I did this because of this, and I've got all these deep issues, whatever. Keep in mind, you're also talking about your child's grandparents, right? So it's really important that we don't disclose all of our stuff on them. But I also think, especially depending on the ages of your kids, that it's totally important that we talk for real, authentically about our family's histories. I'm reading, oh my gosh, it's so good, you guys. It's not out yet. It's called The Addiction Inoculation by Jessica Lahey. She's the person who wrote The Gift of Failure. And she's talking about one of the best ways we can protect our children against addiction is by not keeping family secrets. And she's so right about this. As a therapist, I know this, and based on my own family, it's also important that, that we really aren't like using euphemisms like, oh, things were stricter back in the day. Like if your parents were really harsh with you, to say, what, people disciplined differently and now we know more. But sometimes I forget that I want to parent in a different way. Or sometimes what happens with my brain is I get really reactive and I go to these old ways of doing it and I'm working on it. So you're not burdening them, but you're also talking for real authentically about your story and about how those experiences impacted you. It can be really helpful to teach your kids the hand model of the brain, which is in The Whole Brain Child. And it's basically this is a really simplified version that I teach to little kids. Is I tell them to make a 5, make a 4, and then hug their thumb with their fingers. And this is a model of the brain. So this is the lower part of the brain, like our brain stem and the lower parts of our brain. And this is the middle part of our brain, right? So this would be actually brain stem, limbic. And these lower parts of our brain are where we have really big feelings, or we just really want to do something, or we just act without thinking. And then this part of our brain here, the top part, is where we pause and we are problem solvers and we make calm, kind choices. But sometimes when our feelings get really big, we can flip our lids and it's hard to pause and make calm, kind choices. So when that happens, we need to figure out how can we hug the lower parts of our brain to calm them down. So when you teach your kids this, and I taught this to my 4 and 5-year-olds, and there's a cartoon in The Whole Brain Child that teaches you how to do that, that you can read to your kids. Then when you have those moments and you're like, guys, I just flipped my lid. I was really angry and I didn't handle it well. And your kids will keep you accountable. They'll be like, Mom, you flipped your lid. They'll keep you accountable too. So what I'm saying to you is it's appropriate to talk about your childhood as long as you're not burdening them and it's not too much information, but it's your authentic story. But I want to focus for just one more minute on another part of that question, which is then afterwards I go to my room and I cry. Here's what I want to say to all of you. When we act in ways as parents that don't feel good to us, instead of it sending us into a shame spiral where we're like, I'm such a terrible parent, like, why, how could I do that? When we beat ourselves up, that's actually, we actually feel shame. And shame, there's a physiological thing that goes with shame. Our stomachs feel that pit of the stomach, our muscle tone collapses, and there's a whole stress thing that happens around shame. Shame is not helpful. It actually makes us more vulnerable to being more reactive and flipping our lids more. So when you act like a crazy person with your kid, and I do it too, The key then is to make the repair with our kids and make the repair with yourself and just say, I'm learning, like what I'm dealing with is really hard. I can't be perfect. And now I'm going to be curious, like, what was that about for me? What got in the way? What do I need to be the kind of parent I want to be? Like, maybe you need more sleep. Maybe you need more support. Um, Maybe your kids just need to get older where they don't, aren't hanging on you all the time. But this is really important to be curious and to say, what was that about for me? And I'll say just one more thing about that. As parents, we should look back on things we've done and go, "Oh, we should do that." Because if we're doing that, it means we're growing, we're evolving, we're seeing that, right? Like if I looked at my middle school diary and I thought how insightful and wonderful it was, what would that say about my development, right? I look back at my middle school diary and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so embarrassing. And I look back at things I did as a parent when my kids were infants and I go, why did I think that was a good idea? That means I've grown, I've evolved, I'm learning, I'm changing. This is positive. So be gentle with yourself. And when you feel bad, that means you're like, I know better. And that's wonderful. And in that moment, I wasn't my best self and I'm working on it. And that's so important to just give yourself that kindness.
Agreed. And I love the idea of this shared language around communication, and also that word curiosity. I use that often. Why did I just do that? Why did I just flip my lid? What is there that I need to investigate more? Has been an extraordinary tool
And
for
Amy, just
me.
really quick, I think curiosity is I'm fascinated with, I'm curious about curiosity. When we're curious, it actually engages our prefrontal cortex. So it makes it less likely we're going to flip our lids. So anytime we become curious or even just notice, like I'm noticing I'm about to flip my lid, like I'm noticing that anytime we bring that lens, it actually keeps us more integrated. And we can use curiosity with our kids. Like, let's be curious about your feelings. I say that to my kids too. Like, my kid will be like, I'm so mad. And I'll say, you know what? Feelings are really important. Feeling anxious, like how great your brain's doing its job. It's saying, hey, you need to pay attention to keep yourself safe. Like, thank you, brain, for keeping me safe. Now I'm going to be curious about that. And when we help our kids become curious about their feelings and to say, okay, what are my feelings telling me? What do I need to do differently? Or what is it I need right now? Those are such gifts we can give our kids if we can model curiosity for our feelings and teach them to be curious about their feelings too.
Yeah, chasing the why opens up extraordinary conversation. Okay, the next question is, do you have any knowledge or experience with biofeedback, neurofeedback regarding brain wiring, to use it as a tool to help wire or rewire the brain?
I'll say that for a long time, I did not recommend neurofeedback. Biofeedback's been around for a really long time. There's some really good science behind it. Biofeedback, I think, is phenomenal. And I do recommend that for pain, for anxiety, all kinds of things. I mean, there's even this thing where you can, if you with a kid, you can say like, okay, we're going to take deep breaths and get ourselves calm. And once you get calm enough, the biofeedback thing will like moo. And you're like, we're just trying to get a moo. And they get that immediate feedback and then they can learn to regulate their own physical states and emotional states. So I'm a big fan of biofeedback. Neurofeedback for a long time, I did not recommend because I didn't feel like there was enough science to support it. And for sure, not the claims that a lot of people were making. Now there's a lot more science behind it, but I want to just say too, there are a lot of different kinds of neurofeedback. And there's really only a couple that I feel confident in the science. So just make sure you're reading what is evidence-based behind this, because sometimes some of those like brain training kinds of things promise all of these things and then they can show efficacy, but it doesn't generalize to other areas of your life and it's not long lasting. So just make sure you're reading the research. But yes, any kind of repeated experience can change the brain. So if those are tools through neurofeedback, and I'm feeling more positive even about neurofeedback for ADHD, which I was very skeptical about for a long time. So definitely do your research, but can be really positive.
Great, thank you. The final question that we have in the Q&A, so if anyone else out there has a burning question, now's your chance, don't miss it, to ask Dr. Tina Bryson. My daughter is starting to stress over her stomach aches. She's 12 with a dairy allergy, but some other unknowns. I want to make sure our attention to these bouts and her stress over it won't also create a PTSD reaction or even an eating disorder.
That's a really big, complex question. And whoever wrote that question, I'm going to invite you to email me directly at info@tinabryson.com. I have a child with a chronic pain disorder that I can go into a lot more detail with you on and give you some really good resources for her and for you. Even there's an organization called I'm writing it here, mychip.org, that stands for uh, creative healing for youth in pain. So kids who have chronic health issues and chronic disorders, there are like these free groups for kids to meet other kids who deal with it. And there are free things for parents to have resources. I'm actually on the board because I believe in them so much. I get no money for doing it. I have a kid with a chronic pain disorder. It's super important that we validate our kids' experiences. So much of the time when kids have stomach aches or whatever, they can be anxiety related, they can be medical related. Just because doctors can't find what it is specifically doesn't mean it's not real. And so when we tell our kid, like when we ignore it so that we don't reinforce it, actually our kid still feels it, but then they're alone in it. So just parents sometimes ignore it because they don't want to reinforce it. And then they find out later it was something real and then they feel horrible. So really validating your kid's experience is the most important thing. And then problem solving together if your child is 12 to talk about some ways like, yes, you're experiencing this pain. That's so hard. I'm going to help you. What are some things we can do to get your mind off of it or to change your brain's pain signaling? There's all kinds of things I can recommend in an email that you send me directly. But we really want to show up for our kids, whether it's stomach aches or emotional aches, and really validate their experience. Otherwise, they still have it, but they're alone in it.
Right. Great. Thank you. The final question that we have this evening is, what about two parents that aren't on the same page parenting? One lid flipper, one calm. Clearly, I'm the one listening here and learning, and the other is not.
Yes. Okay. So as a child and adolescent therapist and a parenting consultant person who's done a lot of work with parents, I will say that very few parents are actually on the same page. I've met very few. The goal is to kind of be in the same chapter or book, right? But what's really important is that we remember that what the research says is that if children have secure attachment with at least one person, so just one person being the calm in the storm and all that is huge for your kids, right? I think, adults are adults. You can't make any other adult do anything. But if someone is prone to flipping their lid, it's really important to figure out what that's about. Is that hot temper and that reactivity coming from some fears that their child is, too spoiled or too indulged? Is it more about that's the way I grew up and so I'm just doing it that way? Is it more about that person having a ton of stress in their life and just really not having enough capacity frequently? So really being curious and chasing the why about what that's about, because the answer would be different depending on what that is. Getting clear with the other person in a calm moment when you're connecting to say, look, when you get really reactive, do you want me to run interference? Like, should we have a secret signal? Like, you do this and I know like it's tag team time. Like my husband and I used to do that all the time. Like when I was about to scream, I'd be like, hey, can you come take over? Because I know this is not going to go well. So really negotiating that ahead of time can be really helpful. But I think, it's really, if we're really reactive as parents, there's typically something that we need differently. Our needs are not being met, or we have some work to do in terms of reflecting on stuff. What's key is that you keep doing what you know your kid needs, to continue to have conversations with your co-parent about what values you have, what things you want to model in your family, and what steps you're going to take to do them. It can be really helpful to listen to a podcast together or listen separately and then talk about it. At the end of No Drama Discipline, There's a 3-page letter called A Note to My Child's Caregivers. And it's basically the whole philosophy of how discipline is about teaching. And we should never make our children feel afraid because it makes them more reactive and less likely to learn. So it's counterproductive. So you can kind of try and get on the same page around a philosophy, or around the same kind of general philosophy. So those might be some helpful tips as well. And it can be really helpful to seek out a parenting consultation with someone who can kind of help you talk about and communicate around some of the big trigger moments. I'll just say one other thing about that. What I see happen a lot is one parent tends to be more permissive and one parent tends to be stricter or more reactive. So because one parent is more reactive and strict, the other parent becomes more lenient and softer to compensate. And then the other parent becomes stricter to compensate. And so what happens is the parents get further and further away from each other. And what their parenting is really about is about reacting to each other. And it's not even about what's happening with the kid. So just getting really clear on what are your goals, what are your values in your family, what are areas of growth, and then how are you going to get there?
Great, thank you. Okay, just one more snuck in, and I want to respect everyone's time, so we'll end sharp at 7:30. When my son has flipped his lid, the soothing step is impossible to reach. Suggestions?
Depending on the age of your kid, yes. So when kids push us away, when they're really reactive, so when they flip their lid and we're trying to soothe them and they don't want it, or it makes them more reactive. I get that question a lot too. Please don't chase your child and be like, no, I'm going to give you empathy right now. Like that would be really disrespectful. Here's what I recommend. Kids have different preferences, right? When some kids flip their lid, having someone just talk to them and having that input into their ears actually can be more dysregulating, and they do better being by themselves, being quiet, being away from other things. A couple things you can do. In The Power of Showing Up, one of the suggestions in the soothing chapter is about helping your child, if they're young, create a calming corner or a little calming cave that has like a fuzzy blanket and some snacks and a book or some things that help them calm down, so that your child kind of has a place to go to regulate themselves. It's not a punishment. You don't send them there as a punishment, but you can say like, do you want to go to your calming place or your rocket cave or whatever you want to call it? So when your kid is really flipping their lid and they don't want you to connect with them, they don't want you to soothe them, you can still totally show up by saying, let's say they run to their room and they slam the door and you come in and you say, honey, you're having such a hard time. I will listen. Or how can I help? And they say, leave me alone. I hate you, whatever. And they're just lashing out at you. You can just say, I'm going to be here for you if you need me. I'll come back and check on you in a few minutes, but I'm going to be over in my room. Just let me know if you need anything. So it's really not about forcing the soothing on them. It's about being available and offering your presence. So you really can give them time to figure that out on their own if they want to do that. You just offer your presence. You can also sit right outside their door. If they've closed their door, you can say, I'm going to be right here, right outside your door if you need me. You can come back, and sometimes those big flip their lid moments happen because kids are dehydrated and their blood sugar is low. Bring them a snack, bring them a drink, and then just say, I'm just checking on you. Are you okay? Do you need anything? So just making yourself available is the key.
Fantastic.
That's really important for teenagers too, because they don't really want to necessarily share everything with us and have our input about everything. But we just are like, I'm here. I'm going to be in the kitchen. Let me know if I can help with anything. Just making ourselves available is everything.
The power of presence.
Yeah.
Tina, thank you so much for this last hour and a half. We're so grateful that you showed up for Eagle County, and thank you for all that stayed on. We're going to have the drawing. So my technology crew is going to spin a wheel or pull it out of a hat. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's going to be great.
And Amy, I think you were checking on something at the time, but I told Madison that whoever wins the book, I'm happy to sign a book plate and mail it to them so you can have a personalized signed signature in your book.
Fantastic. All right, here we go.
Yay.
All right, Nicole, you're the big winner. So we'll be in touch with you through email, and you'll be able to access and get a signed copy of The Power of Showing Up. Everyone, go out there. It is a game changer, and to To Tina's point, it is a North Star. You're saving me here. Thank you. And $100 gift card to Assembly. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you put it on your calendars, February 24th with Dr. Scott Cyphers. We'll be talking about kids and anxiety, and he'll be giving us strategies that help. So tinabryson.com, everyone keep taking great care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.